千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Let us begin. Now, I would like to extend a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let us continue with Tao Te Ching 31. The chapter title, as we have discussed previously, is Value the Left, taken from the fourth line of this chapter. In this chapter, it isn't just the left that is important, it also talks about the right. This left and right dichotomy has nothing to do with our modern usage of the terms. Rather, they are based on an ancient Chinese paradigm that we began to explore last time. So today, we will continue that exploration and go deeper into the meaning of the left side versus the right side. Here is chapter 31. As always, we have done our sectional analysis, looking for repeating characters, patterns in the original poetic construction in order to see where the section dividing marks can be. And here is the result of that analysis. As you can see, we identified 4 sections in 31. Lao Tzu begins this chapter right off the bat talking about how the military is a tool of misfortune. It is a very negative thing from the perspective of humanity at large. In that first section, spanning lines 1 to 5, Lao Tzu also introduces the left and the right in lines 4 and 5, respectively. In the second section, Lao Tzu goes further into the explanation of that, talking about how honorable people would not regard the military as a suitable tool. And if the military has to be used at all, it must be done with calmness, with detachment, without glorification of the war itself and the killing that always happens. So, in section 2, we see Lao Tzu continuing his condemnation of warfare and the military. Section 3 is what we got to previously. We talked about auspicious events associated with the left-hand side and inauspicious events associated with the right-hand side. Then we got to the discussion of the lieutenant general versus the major general. So that is where we will pick up our discussion from last time. So with a quick recap, I think nothing explains the left and right ancient paradigm better than to illustrate with graphics. At a glance, you can see exactly what it was all about. You can also see that the orientation of left and right was based on the perspective of the ruler. So depicted here, customarily, ancient rulers would sit facing the south with their back to the north. So that is a tradition going back 4,000 or 5,000 years. In that orientation, the right hand of the ruler would be the west orientation, and the left hand of the ruler, as you can see in this image, will be oriented toward the east. So in that paradigm, the eastward direction is where the sunrise occurs in the morning. It is represented by yang in the yin and yang symbol, as you can see in the image as well. Because the sun rising is signifying an auspicious beginning for the day, that paradigm is extended to cover all auspicious beginnings. In this illustration, you can see spring identified as the auspicious beginning of the year. Spring is the season where things begin to grow. Things have awakened from the winter time that just passed. And living things begin to become active once again. So, extending from there, the birth of an infant is celebrated as the auspicious beginning of a life. And furthermore, the development, the nurturing, the growth of that life is also associated with the east direction or the left-hand side. This is why the left is seen as auspicious. It is aligned and centered upon life itself. It is associated with the home because the home is where nurturing, protection, and growth can take place. So what about the left? We were able to cover the right-hand side in addition to the left previously. And this is again based on the ruler's orientation, facing south with his back to the north. The right-hand side is the complement or the opposite of the left. It is the westward direction, the direction where the sun sets. It is the inauspicious ending of the day, in the sense that whatever was still not finished during the day will have to wait until the next day. Nothing more can be done. It is time to rest. So, the sunset being the inauspicious ending of the day, the paradigm is further extended to life. The inauspicious end of life is death. And Complementing spring as the beginning of life, we have winter as the end of the year. So, death of a human life, winter, the end of a year, sunset, the end of the day, they all follow a pattern identified with the yin side of the yin and yang symbol. Therefore, the end, the closing, the termination all become identified with the right-hand side. This is why it is associated with violence. And it so happens that most people being right-handed, the right hand is what is used for striking, for violence. This is further extended to cover warfare, which is a kingdom wielding a weapon of its army to attack its neighbor, another kingdom. All of this apply to our lives as well. Whenever we give in to aggression, if we were to attack someone else, it is basically us, as the rulers of our lives, launching an attack using the army of violence to assault another individual. So that is where the symbology is all brought together. We further go into the two generals who flank the ruler. Previously, we began talking about the lieutenant general positioned to the left of the ruler. And again, the left-hand side is associated with life, nurturing, protection, auspicious beginnings. So, as we discussed, the lieutenant general, the protective general, is entrusted with defense, protecting the kingdom against threats, external as well as internal. Internal meaning law and order within the kingdom. So the priority of this general is to preserve life rather than to cause death. That makes sense, being on the left-hand side of the ruler. So this is all very consistent with the paradigm that we have looked at. We also spoke of the opposite, which is the major general on the right-hand side of the ruler. This is the senior ranking member of the military, the senior most, the highest rank, higher than the lieutenant general to the left of the ruler, responsible for leading the army to attack an enemy as commanded by the king. So this general is all about death and destruction, the waging of war. Again, very consistent with the symbology representing the right side. This is the slide we ended up on last time. All about the major general complementing the lieutenant general. And I find that it is easiest to see the dichotomy, to see this ancient scheme, again, with an illustration that begins with the ruler in the center. So, as we have seen by now, to the right of the ruler is the general responsible for war. This is the offensive power of the kingdom. This is externally directed, an instrument of the state to assert its will, the right hand of the ruler. When this general leads the army toward some kind of military objective, it is inauspicious indeed, because you know some heads will roll. That is, some lives, probably many lives, will be lost. To the left of the ruler is the general responsible for keeping the peace. So, as I mentioned, the defense. Internally oriented, this is the ability of the state to maintain security and stability. This is the fortress of the homeland, the shield of the people. So I started talking about the right-hand side being inauspicious because it is the right hand of death. After all, the general is the leader of an invading army. So the mobilization of that army, when it is on the march, that is an ill omen, an omen of doom, an omen of impending death. On the other hand, literally, the left hand representing life instead of death, as we have discussed, this general keeps the kingdom safe and secure. And therefore, the use of force is to promote that stability. It is not to oppress the people. So, further exploring the inauspicious aspect of this symbology, as Lao Tzu points out, even in the chapter before this one, the right hand, the army, the military, is a tool of misery. It inflicts pain. It inflicts injuries and grief long after the battle is done. So, inauspicious because it isn't just death, but also great suffering for the people. So the negative effects linger on, requiring gradual recovery over years. Now, this is accurate. A description from Lao Tzu that we have seen is a pattern that's been repeated numerous times in human history. What about the auspicious side? This is all about physical security, allowing the kingdom to prosper. This is placing the greater importance, although the lower rank compared to the major general, that is the senior general, the rank is lower, and yet the importance is greater. And it is greater because the primary goal of a ruler in ancient times isn't to wage war, but to protect the people, to let society flourish, to build upon what they have already had as a foundation. So the powerful military may get all the attention, but it has always been the left hand of life that actually advances the building of the civilization. And ultimately, This is why the title of this chapter is Value the Left. We should understand and cherish life, nurturing, peace, and protection. This value is something that goes far beyond anything that one can derive from death. Therefore, Lao Tzu spells it all out, saying the lieutenant general is positioned to the left, the major general is positioned to the right. What I find interesting about this passage is that it is almost never explained in other sources, in other works on the Tao Te Ching available in the West. And yet, as you can see, it is quite important and meaningful once we dig into it. So now, continuing on with Tao Te Ching 31. Line 19. We say that they are treated as if in a funeral. So this is a reference to war. This line follows the line about the general who leads the army, the major general, the symbol of death. So when Lao Tzu looks at this, he provides his own perspective from the Tao. So Lao Tzu sees the military formation as a funeral procession. He's asking the tough question: is there really a fundamental difference between the two? And Lao Tzu goes beyond the usual national pride or hero worship. So I want to point out here that we're subjected to the same human nature that really hasn't changed in thousands of years. We also see in our society the excessive national pride or hero worship associated with warfare. And off to one side, unrecognized, often neglected, is the human cost of what these heroes actually do, which is killing, plain and simple. And Lao Tzu never forgets the real value of all human lives. Lao Tzu and the Tao perspective would not be one that values only human lives on one's own side, but all human lives are of equal priceless value. So Lao Tzu is challenging all of us to think deeper. We hear people paying lip service that life is precious. Life is priceless. Question: do we really believe that? And if so, what about the other side? Are those not human lives as well? Do we see them as fully human? As we often see depicted in popular entertainment, blockbuster movies feature nameless bad guys to be mowed down by the main characters while the audience cheers. This exposes an inconsistency in our thinking. Many people will say they believe "thou shalt not kill" as a divine commandment, while also at the same time think it is a positive thing to kill enemies, perhaps not thinking about that the enemies are also human beings with family and friends who will grieve their deaths. That is at the heart of this chapter. Moving on now to line 20. Line 20 says, those who have been killed. I want to break down the 4 characters that we see here. 4 characters. The first one is kill, a common character used in modern Mandarin. Likewise, the second character, meaning people. In this context, plural. In other contexts, it can be singular, like person. Then we have an apostrophe S. So that's represented by 1 character in this ancient Chinese passage. And then the last character means multitude, a crowd, the masses. Still a common character being used today. All 4 characters are in widespread common everyday use in modern Mandarin. But when we string them together, the meaning can sometimes be misconstrued. It is talking about the many, the multitude who are dead, who have been killed. So the misconception or the misunderstanding can be that this is referring to those who have done the killing. But this is directed at the victims of war, the casualties of war, which includes combatants and civilians alike. Those who were engaged in the battles and died as a result, and innocent bystanders. The collateral damage. Furthermore, this line is inclusive of all sides of a battle, not just our side, but the opposing side. It's about all the lives lost, looked at from the larger perspective. So, true compassion extends to everyone, regardless of who they happen to be. As I mentioned, the conventional mindset, not the Tao mindset, usually cares only for our people. But in the oneness of the Tao, there is no separation. There is no division. No one can take sides when the sides do not exist. Therefore, everyone is on every side. And human compassion extends to all. Line 21. Should be mourned with sadness. So the victims of war should be mourned with sadness. This is a reiteration from Lao Tzu. He's repeating what we have already seen conceptually, that first, war is never about the slaughter of faceless enemies. Every combatant is a human being who bleeds and hurts, just like you do, just like I would. Every death is a person with family and friends, and it is natural for us to be empathetic so that when we see other people suffer, we cannot help but be affected. That is why in history, it is often necessary for soldiers to regard the other side as somehow subhuman. We see this happen in every war. When the enemies are not quite human, they are easier to kill. So that, perhaps, is the greatest tragedy of all. Indeed, every battle throughout history is a tragedy, regardless of outcome. Line 22. Victory in war should be treated as a funeral. So again, a reiteration for emphasis. And it's a good point because the celebration of victory is still the expected norm in our world today. What Lao Tzu is expressing is the unusual perspective, sometimes perhaps unexpected. Lao Tzu is telling us that what people assume is the greatest win is actually the greatest loss. When viewed through the Tao, we can see there is nothing to celebrate. When viewed through the Tao, we instead of glory, of patriotism, we can see the senseless brutality, the cruelty, the numerous lives with unrealized potential cut short. We see the maiming that cripple meaningful life. And we have to conclude, indeed, that victory we have attained, not so different from a funeral after all. And this brings home the point that every victory has within it the shame of failing to maintain peace in the first place. Certainly in history, certainly in our culture, that shame, that failure is never brought up. It's never mentioned, never talked about. But when we see it clearly, we can understand what Lao Tzu is saying. There can never be, there should never be any glory or gloating in a funeral like warfare. The funeral image is a powerful motivation force. It's asking us to de-escalate tension, seek resolution, and not go into war, as was so often the case in history. When we see it this way, we begin to become aware that every problem, every disagreement can be resolved if only we remain open-minded about the possibility of peaceful resolution. And oftentimes, we sabotage ourselves out of that peaceful resolution, especially if we presume the other side will always be unreasonable, will never agree, will never stop trying to destroy us. So I am not saying that we don't have bullies writ large. We have seen plenty of those examples in history as well. All the would-be conquerors, we know they need to be stopped. At the same time, we also know stopping them means we did not take care of the problem while it was still small. So, during the warring stage period, in the time of Lao Tzu, after each battle, this line we're looking at here, line 22, it meant weeping for soldiers who had perished, who would never go home. But let's zoom in to modern times to apply this to our lives. The Tao is the ultimate in practicality and being pragmatic. What difference do these lines make if we cannot apply them effectively to our own lives? For instance, we talk about conflicts with other people. It can scale from simple disagreements to all-out personal warfare. A debate and an argument sit somewhere in the middle, and it can vary from varying degrees of civility being brought to bear. So, in real life, oftentimes people think debating is a good thing. It exposes different perspectives. It can help other people see the issues better. But let's make it personal about you and I being dragged into a debate. Here's what the Tao would point out. If you were to win, quote unquote, win a debate, but it is at the expense of someone's feelings, that becomes a hollow victory. It wounds a relationship. So that particular victory, that win, should be treated with regret. And this is the recognition that being right is never worth the loss of connection. So think about a family member, a friend, a coworker. You get into a debate with that person, you must be aware of the risk that you proving yourself right is going to damage the relationship. So in that moment, the realization is that perhaps I never should have gone into the debating stage in the first place. Indeed, taking a step back from that, the realization from the Tao perspective is that one can always state one's position while gently declining to be dragged into what others may call a friendly discussion. And you already know before being dragged into the friendly discussion that it can quickly turn into a heated debate. And the next stop beyond the debate is argument. What if you win the argument? The Tao would say, look at the person you just defeated in the argument. Well, they're people too. They have the same fears and vulnerabilities that you have. They feel the same resentment that you would if you are the one who suffers defeat. So based on that moment of realization, the best thing to do is actually to offer a sincere apology, because you were never out to make an enemy out of anyone. You feel regret genuinely for having let the disagreement get out of hand. To say that you are sorry takes no strenuous effort. It can be short and simple, but it does carry tremendous healing power. So those are the real life examples I would offer. And this is the final line of this chapter, Tao Te Ching 31. At this point, we should bring the ideas together that Lao Tzu has given us to illustrate his overall concept in a way that is easy to understand. So the chapter title, Value the Left. We're ready to expand on the teachings of Lao Tzu to see the Tao concepts in this chapter integrated as a whole, not just in ancient times, but to encompass the totality of existence, specifically the modern lives that we lead. So first, starting with the ruler, remember, this is you, because you are the absolute ruler of your life. A recurring theme throughout the Tao Te Ching is advice to the ruler, translated or interpreted for modern times, advice to you, Your Majesty. And we see that this particular figure representing us also has the left hand and the right hand, symbolizing the two sides that we have talked about. Seeing from the ruler's perspective. So keep in mind, this is the mirror image of left and right for us as we look at the slide. Our right-hand side is the depicted ruler's left-hand side, and so on. We also need to bring in the yin and yang symbol. And similarly, this is seen from the ruler's perspective. The yin side is on the right hand, the yang side is on the left hand. And this is flipped from the way that I usually depict it. So the right hand side is the hand that holds the weapon. And the weapon represents violence, aggression, suffering, and inauspicious misfortune. Then, the left-hand side. We can see the left-hand side is complement to the right. Therefore, it is the hand that holds the shield. So this is protection, peace, defense, auspicious, good fortune. It is good to be protected. And the right-hand side is bad. There is good and bad in the Tao expressed in this manner because contention is bad. So the fundamental nature of aggression, the weapon, the military, is negative. The fundamental nature of war is death. Applied to us, it just means nobody really wins in a fight. So, starting with the military, let's go ahead and be very clear in what we wish to express. The military for the king is the hand that holds the weapon, force, violence, and aggression with vastly negative connotations. The use of the military will always be inauspicious or a misfortune. The nature is always death. There's no getting around it. This is where I talk about the symbology as it relates to the tools that we use. Some would argue philosophically that a tool by itself is neutral. It can be used for good or bad. From the Tao perspective, one would point out that there are certain tools, for instance, the atomic bomb, that when it detonates will result in death and destruction no matter what. So regardless of the good intentions or bad in the hand that is pushing the button, the outcome will carry a lot of negativity no matter what. So this is the last part, that there is a tendency in human nature, the glorification of killing, of the military. This is contrary to the life-giving Tao. The Tao is centered upon life. It is that which gives rise to life. The Tao is oriented to success, achievement, accomplishment, fulfillment. Its opposite, its opposition in symbology is the failure, is the loss. It is doom. So then, let's also focus on the right-hand side. Turn our attention from the right to the left. The hand that holds the shield, representing protection, peace, and life. Just as the right-hand side represents symbology that is always negative, the left-hand side is positive. And from the left-hand side perspective, when the military has to be used, it must be used in calmness. Recognizing that peace is always preferred. And the use of force can only be permitted when there is no other choice, when it is absolutely necessary. And calmness, detachment must always prevail. So then the last part on the left-hand side is the perspective of seeing victory in war as a funeral. Even when the waging of war is necessary, that there was no choice, winning the war is still something that gives no reason for pride, no reason for celebration. This is where you can see that the Tao always values peace over contention, without ruling out completely the possibility that force can come into play. So, we need to apply this to life. First, balancing the left and right. The left, as you see in this slide, is auspicious. It is peaceful and life-affirming essence represented by the left and should be regarded with appreciation and gratitude. The left, the peace, the nurture, these are what we want to maintain as much as possible. Then, on the right, inauspicious, when it is necessary to resort to that, to use force. We take no delight in doing so. It is not a glorious event, but a sad occasion. We regard victory or winning with a somber mindset. So we can work on preventing any similar tragedies in the future. So let's talk about some examples that bring this to life. What if a friend says something inconsiderate? From experience, we know what a typical reaction might be. The typical reaction is oriented to the right, to a weapon. That is, correcting the friend in a sharply phrased point. In pointing out the flaws in what they said immediately. So, this is something that we have seen done by other people, perhaps something that we have done ourselves. In personal interactions, this represents the right side approach. If we were to value the left, it is to pause and ask yourself, is this worth the damage to the relationship? It would be wise to reflect on the cost of potential conflict. What is the real importance of the disagreement? We need to be clear about that. So, a possibility is to let it pass, let it go. Another possibility is to respond gently. Hey, listen, I don't think you meant it that way, but that landed a little bit harsh. So the Tao wisdom is that you protect the relationship rather than to go for some kind of win. Another example, closer to home, is about the family. So think about how a typical scenario is that there is a family gathering coming up. So relatives will be there. Imagine a scenario where you've been dreading it because you know you're going to see a relative there who has different beliefs than you do. And it can be about a particularly sensitive topic. I mean, fill in the blank. We have many sensitive topics in our culture where people bring in differing beliefs. The right side approach to bring a weapon, quote unquote, to the gathering is that you prepare arguments in advance. You're waiting to counter every point that this relative will make. It is as if you are sharpening your weapon before the event. And what would it mean to value the left? It means you recognize persuasion here in that family gathering setting. It is unlikely to really achieve anything, unlikely to change anyone's mind. Indeed, you can come to see it as completely unnecessary. And with that recognition, you may decide instead to just listen without engaging on the battlefield at all. This is Tao wisdom because you choose peace over proving how correct you are. Nothing can be gained by force. Much is preserved by restraint. At the very minimum, you will refrain from doing harm. So the wisdom is about preventing conflicts altogether. Let the small things remain small. There is no need to force clarity when time will clarify and resolve many issues on their own. To value the left is to allow other people to save face. Why not let them have a graceful exit? Valuing the left is to choose silence when the words you utter may hurt. To value the left is to realize that most conflicts never begin when no weapon is raised. So, we also need to talk about what if it's too late? The conflict has already occurred. And suppose you win. Victory looks like the other side stops arguing. The other side withdraws. You feel justified. But with that justification, you can also feel the loss of warmth, loss of openness. This means there is no gloating. There is no telling the other side, hey, I told you so. Instead, to value the left is to say to the other side something like, I don't feel so good about how that went. It's to acknowledge the damage, to restore the balance. It's to recognize that winning in that case is indeed not everything. So, this is preventing conflicts through restraint, patience, and humility. To preserve, not to assert. Not all battles deserve your engagement. And if it has already occurred, your victory is a funeral because the loss has occurred even when you justify it to yourself. You have to respond in a sober way without pride. You have to let your natural compassion come to the surface. And remember, the Tao is never asking us to be weak. The Tao is asking us to be wise. Wise enough not to destroy or cause damage to what we love, like our family and friends. So I think this brings new light to the final line. Victory in war should be treated as a funeral. This concludes our line-by-line analysis of this chapter. It is now time for us to get into the paraphrase. In this segment, our purpose is to demonstrate understanding by expressing the original text using modern verbiage. So here is the chapter. The first section, as we have discussed, begins with the military identified as a very negative quantity, a tool of misfortune. And the first section ends with a reference about left and right. That being the case, here is the paraphrase I would like to offer. Some may take pride in a powerful military, but Tao cultivators regard it as a tool of misfortune. Violence costs lives and is therefore in opposition to all living things. Those who possess the Tao understand this and avoid violence whenever possible. However, this does not mean they are helpless. They value living peacefully at home, but they also value being prepared to defend themselves. So from a modern perspective, this paraphrase describes the thinking or the mindset of Lao Tzu. We now go into the second section, a further elaboration of the conceptual framework. This is talking about how, when using the military, it has to be done with calmness, with detachment, because those who delight in using the military to kill, they are the ones destined to fail. So, here is the paraphrase I want to offer for section 2. Although they are quite capable of using their weapons, Tao cultivators do not regard them as suitable tools for honorable individuals. They only use them out of necessity when they have exhausted all other options. When they fight, they value calmness and detachment above all. They know there is, in truth, no glory in battle, despite what people may think. They also know there is no cause for celebration in victory, because having to fight is the result of having failed to prevent the conflict in the first place. Those who glorify the victories are also the ones who take pleasure in killing. Such people will ultimately fail to achieve what they wish to achieve in the world. Their very nature runs counter to the Tao. So that was a long paraphrase, but I think it does capture everything that Lao Tzu wanted to express in that section. Next, in section 3, Lao Tzu talks about the two generals flanking the ruler, positioning to the left and right. So I want to offer the following paraphrase for that. When peace prevails, everything is auspicious. When there is conflict, inauspicious signs are everywhere. The wise ruler keeps this in mind and governs accordingly. Within the kingdom, the lieutenant general keeps the peace and maintains law and order. At the borders, the major general keeps defenses at the ready to repel invaders. So this is a restatement, and the paraphrase here is something that focuses on the roles and responsibilities more so than the ancient dichotomy or paradigm of left versus right. So the idea is to convey the meaning as much as possible. Finally, we have the last section. This is the one about victory as a funeral. Here is the paraphrase I would like to offer. When the military force is successful, the victory is not celebrated but treated more like a funeral. There is no posturing or glorification, only a deep sense of remorse for the bloodshed. This is the way it must be when one follows the peaceful Tao. So that is the paraphrase for chapter 31. We now go to the full circle. The intention of the full circle is to connect the last line of the chapter with the first line. And we often see that this gives rise to additional clarification or meaning. So it is indeed true that the Tao works in circular fashion. In this case, we have the last line of Tao Te Ching 31, where Lao Tzu says, victory in war should be treated as a funeral. And by now, this should be very familiar to us. So we link it back to the beginning of the chapter, and we see the reference of the military force identified as a tool of misfortune. So the connection between the two is obvious. The tool of misfortune causes the losses, so victory is a funeral. The use of force always results in loss. And this is true even for those on the winning side. And this is telling us to think twice before we ourselves engage in some kind of conflict. Therefore, when we treat our personal triumphs with the gravity of the situation, as we should, what we prioritize is the restoration of the relationship over the satisfaction of beating the other side into submission. Lao Tzu speaks of the funeral as a reminder. Do not let the ego take root in what is usually seen by other people as your success. As I mentioned, the funeral image is also a motivator because it reminds you of its grim nature. It motivates us to de-escalate tension before it gets out of hand. If you and I know the end of a path will come to nothing more than mourning the loss, then we are far more likely to seek the Tao of conflict resolution. Here is the bottom line. In our journey, steer toward the left, the side of life, cultivation, and harmony. We want to guard against drifting toward the right, the side of death and termination, where pride leads to destruction. So finally, I single out the last line as a reminder repeated for all of us Victory in war should be treated as a funeral. The ending of this chapter is not a battle cry, but a moment of silence. As we live our lives in the real world, let us all be aware every win has a cost. If you win at work by stepping on a colleague, if you win at home by silencing a loved one, you are literally holding the tool of misfortune in your hands. Lastly, let us all remember the real victory, the ultimate victory of all, is the one that requires no funeral to begin with. So, this finalizes the ending segments, thus completing our discussion of the entire chapter. We should summarize what we have learned and what we can take away. This is the first half of the two-part summary. This is what we looked at previously, the Tao perspective on conflicts. When it comes to the use of force, in ancient times, it was the kings and warlords of the warring stage period. In modern times, this is talking about the approach that we use to violence. Then, we discussed the left and right symbology. From ancient times, based on yin and yang, the left side representing life, the right side representing death. Then, we also talked about 君子, the noble person, the honorable individual, never defaulting to force as a tool because it causes misfortune. There is nothing good or glorious about using such a tool. Today, for the second half of the summary, we continue on with the Tao perspective on conflicts. We have talked about the distinction between the auspicious and inauspicious. It is easy to see once we understand the symbology that the left honors life and auspicious beginnings. The right symbolizes death and inauspicious endings. And let me just repeat once again that the left and right here, these have nothing to do with our modern usage. This is strictly an ancient Chinese paradigm. The two generals that we talked about represent the left and right. Just like the ancient rulers, you and I are rulers who are served by two generals within as well. They too are responsible for offense and defense. So the major general being on the march is the sign of distress. It is inauspicious. The lieutenant general being at his work, maintaining law and order, is a sign of prosperity. Lastly, we cannot forget about the funeral. And what Lao Tzu would prefer to see is not a funeral for the purpose of mourning the death of people, but a funeral for the death of the ego. In the Tao, there are no clean victories. All victories are costly. The best choice of all is to not reach for the tool of misfortune and not wield it to hurt, to harm, to injure, to kill. The second best choice, once the conflict has occurred, is to not indulge in glorification, but express regret. Not pride, but the resolution to prevent further conflicts. So, at the end of this particular slide, we are emphasizing how what people call victory is always tainted. It is a sobering realization of if only. Like after the conflict, if only I knew how bad it would be, I would never have launched the attack. Or if only I knew how it would damage my peace of mind, I would back away from the conflict in the first place. Or if only I knew the real cost, I would have kept my ego in check. This chapter represents our opportunity to sidestep all of that. Having attended the funeral for the ego, we do not need to resort to the if onlys. Now I know. Now we know. And so going forward, we can do better. This concludes our presentation for Tao Te Ching 31. Share the Tao. For easy access to Tao resources, visit my website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and see everything listed, such as Taoism.net, information about the Tao, and this meeting. Our Facebook community, a place to discuss the Tao with fellow seekers. Our YouTube channel, recordings of all our previous meetings. My Amazon author page, books and audiobooks for further exploration. You can go directly to this page at dereklin.com/links. When you see the benefits of the Tao in your life, share your experience through comments in Facebook and share these resources with friends who may also benefit. If you find my books or audiobooks helpful, please post your reviews on Amazon to guide others to the Tao. If you have connections to prisoners interested in the Tao, contact me through Derek Lin Books on Facebook, and I will send my books to them free of charge. This is the path that I am on, so I can say sharing the Tao has transformed my life in incredible ways. I would like to invite you to come along. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness. Thank you, everyone. We are done for today. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next meeting. Bye for now.